lived at the Cecil Hotel for several years in the 90s. I was pretty heavily addicted to drugs at that time, mostly heroin. One night around 3 a.m. there was knocking on the door to my room. This wasn't that unusual. Once my junkie friends discovered that I had a private room at the Cecil, they were always stopping by at all hours. So I got up and opened the door. There wasn't anyone there. When I looked down the hallway to the left, it was empty, but when I looked to the right, there was something on the floor about 30 feet away that caught my eye. I walked down the hall to get a closer look. It was a $100 bill just sitting there. I picked it up and stuffed it in my pocket. Back in my room, I was ecstatic. If I hadn't found that money, I would have been sick from heroin withdrawal by noon the next day. Now I was flush. The kids wouldn't be out on the dope corners for another couple hours, so I decided I should get some sleep. I turned out the lights and got into bed. When I woke up, it was still dark in the room. I was about to roll over when I noticed that the bathroom door was closed. I had definitely left it open. I could also see that the light was on. Someone was in my room. I quietly got out of bed and pulled my shoes on. I had no interest in dealing with any Cecil Hotel crazy bullshit right now. I grabbed my bag and I was about to leave when I checked my pocket. The $100 bill was gone. My heart sank. I checked my pockets again and again, cursing under my breath. Then I tore apart the bed. It wasn't there. I had to accept the fact that the crook in the bathroom took it. I grabbed the gun out of my bag and I walked over to the bathroom door. You should know the gun wasn't for real. I didn't have any bullets, and I didn't even know if it worked. But obviously I felt more courageous holding it. I pushed open the bathroom door and pointed the gun inside. The room was empty, but the shower curtain at the far end of the room was pulled shut, and I knew for sure it was open earlier. I said something like, "If you want to walk out of here, you're going to crumple up the Benny that you stole from me and throw it over the curtain. I'm holding a gun on you right now." There was no response, but in the quiet of the room, I could hear breathing on the other side of the shower curtain. Then I grabbed the bar of soap off the sink and threw it at the curtain. I said, "I'm not playing with you. You're either going to give me that money back or one of us is going to die." Then I heard the strangest sound. "Okay," I said. "I'm going to count down from 3, toss the bill on the floor, and no one gets hurt. 3, 2. Suddenly there was a loud pounding on the door to my room. I ran to the door and threw it open. It was my dope buddy, Jimmy. I told him to hurry up and get in. I said, "There's a dickhead in my bathroom who stole $100 from me. Help me get it back and we'll split it." He pulled out the knife he always carried and said, "Giddy up." The two of us walked back into the bathroom. I looked at Jimmy and pointed at the curtain. I was about to say something, but Jimmy stomped across the room to the shower stall. He was about to reach for the shower curtain when 4 or 5 shots rang out. The sound was so loud, my ears rang for days. Jimmy fell back against the sink and then onto the floor. There was smoke hanging in the air. I looked at Jimmy, and then I ran out of the room and down to the lobby. The front desk had already called 911. Of course, the shooter was gone by the time the police arrived, and Jimmy was dead. I was interrogated pretty harshly, but in the end, I wasn't charged with anything. Later that morning, the Cecil got me a new room, and the police let me grab my stuff from the old room. I was already pretty dope sick by then. As I was cleaning out the room, I noticed something underneath the clock radio. It was the $100 bill with a smiley face written on it. I'll admit, I spent the money on dope. I had to, but that was the beginning of my long road back to sobriety. I always stayed at the Cecil Hotel when I was in Los Angeles. The price was right, the people who worked there were nice, and the rooms were clean enough. But all that changed on my last visit. I had to spend a lot of time in my room, and I started to get this uneasy feeling like maybe I was being watched. Underneath all of our sophistication as human beings, we still have our animal instincts. I learned to trust those instincts on this trip. On the second night of my stay, I was in my room watching TV when something caught my eye. I got up to check it out, and I found a spot on the wall about 2 feet off the ground where the wallpaper was ripped and sticking out, and there was drywall dust on the floor beneath it. I bent down to get a closer look, and I was horrified to see there was a hole in the wall. I put my eye up to it, and I could see into the room next door. There was an older man sitting there on the floor on the other side of the wall. He must have been watching me for days, and that animal part of me knew it. He could even see into my bathroom from this spot. In any case, at that moment, something was distracting him. Suddenly, the door in his room opened and some guy walked in. My neighbor, the peeping Tom, hopped up and walked over to this guy, all agitated and waving his arms. I couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but they were arguing, and when the intruder turned his back towards me, I could see he had a hammer in his hand. Suddenly, he raised it up and struck my neighbor on the head, hard. I could hear the sickening thud. My neighbor fell back, and this other guy struck him over and over again on the head. When my neighbor was unconscious, the other guy took off his bloody shirt and started going through my neighbor's suitcase. I was crouched down watching all this in stunned disbelief. It didn't feel real. I leaned back for a second and shifted my weight, but then I kind of fell forward against the wall with a little bump. When I looked back through the hole, the guy with the hammer was now looking in my direction. I scooted to one side out of his field of vision. I couldn't be sure, but then it felt like he was on the other side of the wall looking through that hole. I held my breath. After a few minutes, I heard the door in my neighbor's room open and close. I was about to get up and dial 911, but then this had to be him. If he thought I saw him, he was going to kick in the door at any minute. If I tried to call 911 now, he would hear me. So I moved over to the bed and sat there, praying he would go away. The knocking eventually stopped, and I started to calm down, but then I got that feeling again. That feeling I was being watched. I ran over to the hole in the wall and looked through. On the other side, the man with the hammer was looking back at me. How could I be so stupid? He had returned to my neighbors, and I was just sitting out there in the open like a fool. Now he knew I saw what he did. He smiled at me. I hopped to my feet in one motion, grabbed my bag, and I ran out of the room. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, he opened the neighbor's door and started after me. I ran towards the stairwell door at the end of the hall. I burst through the door and started down the steps, 2 or 3 at a time. He followed me maybe 5 seconds later. We were on the 8th floor. He was able to jump 6 or 8 steps at a time. I wasn't going to make it. He was going to catch me and beat me to death in this stairwell. My only option was to get out of the stairwell at the 5th floor and hope for the best. When I got to the 5th floor and threw open the door, he almost grabbed me, but I made it into the hallway. Miraculously, the hallway was filled with people. There was a party going on 3 or 4 doors down. I ran into the party and slammed the door. People jumped up ready to kill me for crashing, but I told them what happened. A few guys went out into the hallway, but the hammer guy had continued past the door and down to the stairwell at the other end of the hall. All the people milling around saw him, so I guess he had no choice. 2 days later, the police found him. My neighbor, the peeping Tom, actually lived, although with a traumatic brain injury. I eventually had to return to California to testify, but I didn't stay at the Cecil. I moved from Minneapolis, St. Paul to Los Angeles to become a screenwriter. Because I didn't have a lot of money, and because I was working on a screenplay about the seedier side of life, I decided to book a room at the Cecil Hotel. I forced myself to get a double occupancy room, which meant that I would have a roommate. I hoped to meet someone who would lend some authenticity to my screenplay. My first roommate was a frail old man named Martin. He checked in late that first night, and he seemed a little confused and grumpy, so we didn't talk a whole lot. I need to mention that on my way out to LA, I found a little dog I named Rosie at a truck stop in Kansas. The lady behind the counter said that Rosie had been there alone for days, begging for food. So I got her a burger, put her in my car, and she traveled the rest of the way with me to California. Anyway, that first night, Rosie, Martin, and I all went to bed at around 11 p.m. I woke up a few hours later. Rosie was growling. This old guy, Martin, was standing next to my bed, staring off into a darkened corner of the room. I sat up and said something like, "What's going on, friend?" He started pointing. "You don't see that?" he said. I couldn't see anything, so I reached for the lamp on the bedside table. As soon as the light filled the room, it was clear there was nothing there. I helped the old man back to his bed. Before I turned off the light, he told me there was a little boy standing in that corner, motioning to him like he was saying, "Come here." Martin squeezed my arm. The little boy's eyes were all white, he said. I thought, oh boy, this old dude is losing it. Early the next morning, the California sun was shining, and it was like the previous night had never happened. Martin was in a much better mood. After talking to him for 20 minutes, I realized that I'd struck gold. He had lived in LA his whole life and knew all kinds of stories about old Hollywood. He also claimed to be running buddies with some very notorious characters like Tex Watson, who was part of the Manson family. He also said that Richard Ramirez quote-unquote idolized him. He offered to show me around town, so I took him up on it, and the three of us left the Cecil Hotel in my car for a day out on the town. We had a lovely time visiting LA's underbelly. We went to Cielo Drive, where Sharon Tate and others were murdered by Tex Watson and the Manson family. Martin recounted all the grisly details. Trent Reznor from 9 Inch Nails had a recording studio there at that time that he called Les Pigs, which was a reference to the fact that the Manson family wrote pig in Sharon Tate's blood on the front door. Anyway, it was a fascinating day. We ate lunch at this old diner, and when we were on our way back to the Cecil, Martin started to tell me another story. All day he had given accounts of other people's crimes. Now the mood started to change as he talked about himself. He said he took me to that diner because he and a friend used to live nearby. He said that back then they had noticed that a school bus driver used to park his bus behind the diner and eat his lunch there every day before picking the kids up in the afternoon. One day, he and his friend waited for the guy, robbed him, and beat him unconscious. They then stole the bus and parked it out in front of the school with the other buses. This was back in the day when kids weren't coddled and watched over like they are now, he said. When the bell rang, kids started to get on the bus. Martin's buddy told them that he was the regular bus driver's brother. No one else seemed to notice. The kids had to give them directions to their houses, and one by one they dropped them off safely, but Martin said they had plans for the last 2 little boys. He looked at me with a sick, twisted grin on his face. I said, "What were you planning for those kids, Martin?" He was clearly getting off on this, but he hesitated. At this point, we were getting stuck in traffic on the 405 freeway. Just then, a bright yellow school bus pulled into the lane next to us on the passenger side. The smile left Martin's face, and he became very agitated. "Look at them," he said. I kind of bent down to look up at the bus. There were a bunch of kids in the windows looking down at us. "What?" I said. "You're pointing at them." No, he said. "Look at their eyes. Look at their eyes. It's just like last night." After a minute, the bus pulled ahead, but Martin was quiet after that. Back in our room that night, he was the same grumpy and confused old man from the night before. Again, we went to bed early. I awoke to Rosie growling. This was the second and the last time I ever heard her growl. Martin was standing there next to the bed, exactly like the night before. But something was different. It was like I was watching a grainy film. He was pointing and talking to me, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. And when I looked down at his feet, they were kind of floating off the ground. Unlike the night before, when I looked into the corner of the room, this time I could see something. There was the outline of a little boy, and his eyes were white, with no irises. I sat up and tried to turn on the lamp, but I swear it would not turn on. Then it felt like the room started to move. All the dark places and shadows turned into the outlines of children. Rosie jumped off the bed and hid underneath. These shapes surrounded Martin, grabbing his hands. He tried to pull away, but then they grabbed his feet. He was writhing as if in agony. It was like I was watching it all through the windshield of a car on a rainy night. Everything was washed out and distorted. Then they dragged him into the darkness of the corner like it was the mouth of a cave, and he was gone. Rosie jumped back on the bed and into my lap, trembling, and eventually we fell asleep. When I woke up, I was happy to see the California sunshine, and that Martin was still in his bed. Later, when I tried to wake him, I realized something was wrong. I called 911, and the first responders told me that he died in the night of natural causes. I found out later that he spent many years in jail for pedophilia, and also that he was the prime suspect in the disappearances of up to 7 other children who were never found. I didn't know that at that time. Maybe what I experienced that night was a dream. What do you think?